On today's episode, we learn that if you don't like bad storytelling, you're a misogynist. Find that the military is totally apolitical. Hear how it's reasonable for the president of the US to be vindictive against his own citizens. See how Biden defeated Big Pharma. Get a lesson in libertarian reading lists. And lastly, learn about how long COVID is preventing people from returning to work. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we find in our feeds. We tear them apart, talk about what went wrong in the post, what underlying assumption they've mistaken, and, of course, try to laugh along the way. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host, Britt. And before we make fun of other people's bad posts, we always look back at our own bad posts, make fun of ourselves, because we also have had terrible posts in the past. It's just part of being human. Before we get to that, just a reminder to like and comment and subscribe. All that good stuff helps us out. Leave a like on the video if you're watching on YouTube, and leave a good review if you are listening on a podcast platform. And as a reminder, if you are listening to an audio version of this and want to see the posts visually, you can always go to cringeposts.com where we post the slides. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this post from Britt on his, I believe, his MySpace. Yes, I'm very vaguely familiar with MySpace, so I'm not instantly recognizing the template here. But here we've got Britt, who writes, well, Britt thinks McCain is all right, Obama is a Democrat, but really likes this Sarah Palin lady. Well, I hate to tell this, but 2022 Britt would have to tell past Britt there that Sarah Palin just lost a special election in Alaska, thanks to some ranked choice voting things. But yeah, that is the worst thing about this is, as much as I make fun of you for this is the exact same take I
Yeah.
had. Yeah, so it's the typical like, oh, McCain's whatever, Obama's evil, obviously, but Sarah Palin, no, she's a real conservative.
Yeah, and it's just because it's like, oh wow, it's a female Republican vice president candidate. Like ooh, how cool. Like I still probably can't name a single policy from 2008 that she was about, other than the fact that she was just kind of cringe when I look at her appearances and everything. I guess the thing that stuck with her is just how war hockey she is in general. But it to me, this is like, and this is a MySpace status. I this is, and full disclaimer, this is not the actual post as it exists. I had to go dig through different things and find text, and it all existed in separate pieces. So you can also see the picture of me. That's my profile pic at the time that I last logged into MySpace, which is a bathroom selfie, which you could do a whole cringe episode on just that itself. But yeah, I thought McCain was fine. I kind of like when the media said he's a maverick, I also echoed that sentiment. And then, obviously Obama was the Antichrist. And, for a lot of people in the Middle East, he kind of was. And then Sarah Palin was just this crazy, like, oh, wow, how cool, that we've got this lady, and she seems like she's telling it how it is. And I just liked it because it was unique and different, not because it actually had she had any principles or things that resonated with me or I thought were inspiring. So yeah, just unfortunate overall. What's funny is a lot of folks too that I'm still friends with on like Facebook, whatever. I remember them posting similar things to this, but now they're on the exact opposite. Like they're very much like a Democrat. I mean, I guess these are all the same people at the end of the day, but they're very much like, oh, I never would have supported McCain or Palin or any of these folks. So just, yeah, I was an NPC, or there was a portion of my brain that was NPC'd at that point.
Well, it is crazy because as much as we sort of, I at least from my perspective and what it seems to be here, we sort of tolerated McCain. We're like, well, okay, McCain's fine, McCain's whatever, but we recognize that there was, at least in stated stated opinions and speeches and demeanor, there was a difference between McCain and Palin, right? That otherwise we would have been gung-ho on McCain too. So we recognize that there was at least some level of difference, but we weren't really able to see that at the end of the day McCain and Obama were like no different. I mean, again, at that point we probably didn't know Obama was going to be as war hockey as he was, but like ultimately, John McCain was not any different than a modern day Republican, especially in the 2022 era where they've gone so outwardly hawky because Trump alleged to be a dove, right? And they have to be everything the opposite of Trump. And so even even now it's like you look and McCain's no different. And so we recognize there was some difference between him and Palin. And the thing, of course, is Palin is she maybe is more conservative, but at the end of the day, they don't actually do anything that makes a difference, or they don't actually impact the policies that matter in the right way. If like, how small government can you be if you want to grow the largest portion of government
Mm.
in the military wing? But it's just really funny. We're like, oh, McCain's all right. Why is he all right? Why? Why is he not? Why is he not a Democrat too? Can you tell what are the substantive differences between McCain and the Democrats right now? And at the time, maybe you would have said foreign policy, and that wouldn't have turned out to be true, but maybe it just appeared to
Well,
be true.
Obama did talk a pretty good game though, right?
Yeah.
Like he
Right,
he did
right.
talk about change and peace and all that stuff that didn't resonate with evil me, from back in the day, but he at least sounded a bit different.
Yeah.
He
Well, and
ended
he
up
he didn't.
bombing more people than anyone
Yeah.
else before him, but
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and then the other aspect, of course, was the media said that we liked Sarah Palin because she was a governor, and a governor is a great, that's a great you sort of utility
yeah.
to have under your belt, and in terms of the credentials.
Yeah,
So.
that's there's another one that we'll do later on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. I'm excited. Yeah. Well, the only thing I remember of Sarah Palin other is in some interview when a reporter asks her what news sources she reads, like what magazines and newspapers to keep up on the news, and she goes, "Oh, I read all of them." And they're like, "Well,
That's
what
very Trumpian.
specifically?" Yeah, she goes, I read all of them." She's like, Which ones specifically?" "All of them." She wouldn't respond.
That's so Trumpian. Trump just does it better.
Yeah, well, and it's funny at the time she didn't seem as confident as Trump saying it like that, and a lot of people mocked her for that. And I remember in high school, I went to a conservative private high school, and it was highlighted by one of the classes I was in for college applications, and it was like, don't do this because it gives specific examples. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it makes you look like you've done none of the work. But other than that, I don't really remember much from Sarah Palin's campaign, to be honest with you. Okay, we'll move on to the next post here. And this one comes in from a Discord server. And this one comes from a guy who's talking about She Hulk. And now, full disclosure, I have not watched a full episode of She Hulk, but I have watched clips and I've heard summaries and heard critiques along it. And so there's sort of a broader critique I have rather than the specific show that I wanted to talk about here. But anyway, so the post reads, I just think it's weird that Jen complains about men sometimes, can be occasionally shallow, and doesn't make the best decisions, gets interpreted as it's a bad show. They're just character traits that Jen has had for decades. And what I find so incredibly frustrating about this take was this came on the heels of a conversation where all of these different things about the quality of the show, the arc of the characters, the plot, the ways that the show portrays these struggles was critiqued. And the only thing that this person took away was, oh, your guys' complaints are is that she complains about men sometimes and she has character flaws. And it's like, no. The complaints, for instance, were that the ways the show portrays, in the show, she talks about how she gets harassed by men and catcalled and all that kind of thing. And then after she gets her, Hulk powers, then that happens to her and she like unloads on them and like gets mad and turns into She-Hulk and stuff. And it's just very poor writing to say this has happened to her in the past. We are telling you that this has continually happened to her. And now that she has the power, we're going to show it happening and show her acting out. Whereas the way that you paint that out is, of course, is you set up the plot where she's going somewhere. This happens to her. She becomes harassed and she has no power to do it, right? She gets and sort of it's painted in this like, again, you show, you don't tell, but good storytelling illustrates without explicating. And the show has so much of this just telling you that you are, and there's another scene where she's working on this case and she presents um, her strategy, and the male colleague tells her, I don't really think that that's a good thing. And her female colleague is praising her. And she's not really bothered when the male colleague says that. And they kick him out of the room. The only voice of just kind of handily dispatch him. There's no consequence to it. And then her female colleague proceeds to tell her all the wonderful things she is, how smart she is, how accomplished she is, how much she
Wow.
has set a precedent. And again, it's like, look, if you want this to be a meaningful show, the struggle of like a woman in the corporate, because I'm actually not going to lie, I think there are many men who act stupidly towards women in the corporate sphere, because I think a lot of men treat a lot of people they perceive as lower them, and I think there's probably a little bit of that that exists. Like that's not a false thing that exists. The problem is, in this context, if you want to portray that effectively, you have it so that the male colleague either dismisses her and says she can't do that, he dismisses her, or takes that and says, well, I'm going to be the one running this case, or we're going to run it my way. You have to have some kind of consequence, and then you can't have the other colleague telling the audience how amazing and incredible and accomplished the main character is. You have to demonstrate that, you have to show it. So these are part of the critiques of this show, and for all of these legitimate critiques, it seems the only people who want to defend the show can hear is, oh, you don't like it because she's criticizing men and you're a, and you're not a feminist. And you're like, that's what you got out of this?
Yes, yeah. That the people don't realize that if you watch a show, or if anyone watches a show, they watch it with the goal of wanting to like it.
Yeah.
At least for as of late, maybe there's a little bit of hate watching and stuff, but like in general, if you're going to spend 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour to watch a show or a movie or anything like that, hopefully the goal is that you're going to like it, right? Like I don't turn it on because it's like, oh, I'm going to hate this, other than like I don't know. I haven't done that in a long time. Like I purposely have not watched She-Hulk because it's like I know I'm not going to like it, so why would I waste my time watching it?
Right.
Although it might be like we texted about earlier, like it might be useful to watch it just for the sake of dialoguing on the show.
Hmm.
Um, but like this is reminiscent of like stuff like where people would criticize the Star Wars sequels, or about the character Rey, or they criticize Captain Marvel, and then the comeback from the industry or some of these other folks would be like, well, you just don't like it because the main character is a woman, or the main character is a person of color, or anything is like that. And it's like, no, like we legitimately don't like Rey as a character because she has zero arc. Her acting is more or less fine, but her story is just terrible. And the only weakness that she has as a character is that she has a memory hole in her brain and she doesn't know who she is. And like then you start to put together the pieces and you realize like, oh, like all of these female characters, like they're not allowed to have like any sort of foible or issue or personal internal deficiency that they have to overcome, because that's what makes a hero, is someone that has an internal issue and they overcome it. I mean, the Hulk himself, his internal issue is like unbridled rage and anger, and he has to figure out how to control it and use it towards something good, and that requires him sorting out within himself. Everything else, though, for like these female protagonists is external. It's Rey doesn't remember, and she's on a journey because someone else took the memory from her, or Captain Marvel had her memory removed from her, and now she remembers. And there's a scene in that Captain Marvel movie which is just so, it's like it just appeals to the vindictiveness of that women, I think a vindictive woman would want to have, which is, she's at some gas station, and a biker rides up and says, you look pretty, or you should smile more, or something like that. I can't remember exactly. And he goes into the gas station and she's all cocky because she has all this power, right? She has all the power in the world. So she goes in there and she basically, it's inferred that she takes all of his clothes, leaves him naked in the gas station, and then rides away with his bike. It's like, oh, that's what the villain does. The villain has all the power and is not gracious with it, goes in, takes what they want, and then leaves. And it's like, man, like, but that got applause in the movie theater, and people were, women were clapping and doing all this stuff about it. It's like, man, like that's not what a good character is. You don't make a hero in the image of the vindictiveness that you want to, enact upon the world. Like a hero overcomes their internal struggles and makes the world a better place and has self-control and all these things. And based on the clips I've seen from She-Hulk, I mean, Jennifer or whatever her name is doesn't have that either. And go for it.
Well, I'll say, and the show is not fully out yet, so there could be room for character arc where there are personality flaws, but there are exact scenes like that where she is extremely powerful and overpowers men who taunt her, and you have all the power, and there's no, at least there's no meaningful restraint on that yet. Now that could be, again, the character flaw that she has to overcome, which would put her miles ahead of Captain Marvel. That would be great. However, the writing does not seem to be leading that way so far. It's not being put in a meaningful way. I think a great example of that being punished, and that sort of impulse of revenge, and doing the wrong thing even if you think it's for the right reasons. a great example is in Star Wars Episode 5, where, Luke hears that his friends are in danger, and Yoda tells him, "Do not go. That you need to finish your training. You're not ready yet." And he says, "No, I'm going to go." And he goes and ends up getting his hand cut off by Vader and narrowly making it out alive because it was a whole trap trying to lure him in there. And so it's like this impulse, this angst where he thinks he has this power, and then he goes, and then he's totally shown and humbled, and he has to learn that that was the wrong thing. That was the mistake to make. And in all these shows, like in the Captain Marvel thing, that cockiness is never punished. So far, it seems like Jen is not getting punished for it either. Maybe she will later. Hopefully, it will have some better arcs and redemption there. But of course, the other aspect that we hate is the Mary Sue, the instantly powerful sort of abilities, where she becomes her Hulk and she's training with Bruce Banner, the original Hulk, and he's, showing her how to do all this thing because he's been a Hulk for many years at this point. He's grown and learned how to adapt to this new unfamiliar form, and she just does everything better than him. And it's like this is literally just like
Yeah.
someone's fanfic that they wrote to sort of have like they're like, ooh, what if she was better than him in every way? And it's like, okay, so and I will say I hate aspects of that for male characters or
Of
for female
course.
characters. It doesn't matter. I got really annoyed in the latest Spider-Man movie when for the cheap gimmick they had the kid Ned able to open portals with Doctor Strange's ring. I'm like, that took him like months to learn in his own origin story movie, and apparently this kid can just do it the first time he picks it up by accident. That was so
There's always
dumb
been
to me.
magic in his family, though.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So all these stupid critiques about, oh, you hate it because it's, a woman criticizing men, or you just hate all the shows about women. It's like, no, we hate it because of poor writing, and this take really highlighted this inability to calculate that.
Did you see the new Top Gun movie?
No, I still haven't. I've been
Oh,
meaning
okay. I
to.
won't. I won't say nothing about it then. But I mean, there's a moment in that movie that is that, but for a man, and it's just
Uh-huh,
I
uh-huh,
love it because I love it because they play into it. They're like just embracing the fact that like yeah, like this guy's the best, and
uh-huh.
there's no reason for him to be the best, but he is. So
Okay.
it's because he's Tom Cruise, so he's
Yeah,
gonna be the
yeah,
best.
yeah.
But anyways, yeah, I agree. Like, and it's almost like these writers and these producers and stuff have a fear of making women look weak in any way. It's like, no, but what makes a character three-dimensional is the fact that there are weaknesses and how they overcome that. And I think of shows like specifically like Fargo season 2, which is
Mm,
like just a big whole dialogue on feminism and masculinity and all this stuff, like all played out in a really awesome backdrop. And like you see some really strong and amazing women, and you see both sides of it and of the argument. And it's just these are fantastic, great characters. And yeah, sometimes they look weak, but it's like, wow, I remember these characters, how they work, what they do. It's almost like I know them, right? And that's what makes Luke Skywalker so awesome until the sequels. It's what makes Batman in the Christopher Nolan trilogy so great. Is because they've got this thing that they internally have to overcome in order for them to confront the external threat. And yeah, it's just unfortunate. Like it's never going to get better if they make this straw man of why we don't like these shows. It's like that's not why we don't like them.
absolutely. And bringing up Fargo, even in seasons 1 and 3, the female leads in those,
Oh,
um,
fantastic!
fantastic and clear-headed, very strong characters, and also have personal problems and weaknesses that they have to overcome and hurt. And by the end, they are able to in some, even if there are external blockers. And in season 1, the she sort of has an incompetent chief, and she knows what she wants
Yes,
to do, but
yeah,
she doesn't have the confidence, and she doesn't have the ability to sort of talk sense into him, or to do things in a risky way to get on her own. And she's able to overcome it by the end and stuff. But it's like, even in that scenario where you're sort of painting the, if you want to look at, I never even think of it in gender dynamics, but if that's what they want to play to, if you're thinking about it in gender dynamics, I'm not bothered by the fact there's an incompetent man, because the characters are so well made with strengths and weaknesses showing that, even though she's hampered by this weak man, she also is unable to get the job done herself because of her own sort of reservation at taking charge in the thing. So it excellent storytelling from those perspectives, and not so much from She-Hulk so far.
so
Maybe
far.
again, I will always say, if it's not out all the way, maybe it will resurrect into a good show. Kind of doubt it though. Okay, to our next post. This one comes from Brianna Kalar. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. And she tweets, whatever you think of this speech, this is referring to the Biden speech for the record. The military is supposed to be apolitical. Positioning Marines in uniform behind President Biden for a political speech flies in the face of that. It's wrong when Democrats do it. It's wrong when Republicans do it. And this is so funny. This is like the most opposite moderate take where you're like, okay, well, at least you recognize that when both parties do something bad, it is wrong. What on earth do you mean the military is apolitical? The military is the most political thing in the world. Whatever political party has control of it uses it to their political advantages. Do you think that, sending troops and using troops as sort of the bargaining chip, like, oh, we have troops deployed, we need to fund them, if we don't pass this spending bill, it's good, we're going to starve the troops? Or do you think it's like, I was a veteran, I served my country, that's why you should vote for me? Military is the most political tool in the politician's toolbox. I don't get where this take comes from, or how you even justify saying the military is apolitical.
Yeah, that was that was a really funny part about it. Um, and I think by the very nature of the fact that they had like that people put so much stock into what general has to say, or that, like, oh wow, this is serious because the Marines are standing behind Biden. It's like that speaks to the nature of the fact that, like, yeah, it is political, right? Like this is saying that, like, there is something right with this. And so I think it's kind of one of the great psyops of the 20th and 21st century, that the military is apolitical. I mean, I think it's kind of driven by, like, oh well, we can never have a coup happen like that happens in Venezuela, because we don't want to have the military, go to one side or the other. The military's only job is to protect people. But then it's like, well, he's called the commander in chief, right? Like the president is the commander in chief of the military. And then you start looking at the actual history of how they've used the military. Whether it's in Vietnam with Nixon being like, oh man, like maybe we'll let the war go on a little bit longer, because it will be good for my election. So the military gets to die over there in some jungle, just so that he could, have a better chance of getting elected. Or the more recent example of Afghanistan, and Biden deciding, like, oh, the date we're going to pull out of Afghanistan is on September 11th. It's like, okay, why would you why would you pull out on 9/11? Why would it not be the soonest day that you could actually pull people out? Because every day after that soonest day that you could pull people out means that anyone that dies on those days it's a result of you wanting to have some sort of like symbolic meaning or whatever. And this is also referenced in all the ways, all this military culture that is part of all the different ceremonies that we have, whether a president dies or when they get inaugurated, or all these different things. So to say that is just really, I like what you said. It's the opposite moderate kind of position. It's like, no, it is very political, and I'm happy. It's kind of a white pill in a lot of ways, that Americans are realizing, like, oh, like whoever's in charge is going to wield the military to their own, to their own benefit. Military, FBI, CIA, deep state, and all these different things. So maybe it'd just be better to not have any of that, or have any of that tool spinning the wheel. It's not the homeless man screaming on the side of the road is a lot less dangerous if he doesn't have the gun in his hand, right? And so hopefully, people are kind of waking up to that, and hopefully members of the military are also waking up to that and not wanting to be used as a pawn in these people's political aspirations.
I struggle when this take is almost close to being right, in that you're seeing through a cheap ploy that, Republicans and Democrats are using this as obvious political symbolism and imagery. I mean, the absolute worst take would be, it was powerful seeing those, soldiers up on stage behind Biden, because
There's plenty
obviously,
of those. There are
yeah,
plenty of those
exactly. Right.
takes.
Right. But this one it's like, it's so close because it recognizes that that's a cheap trick. But the problem is, then it diagnoses the problem with it being, the military is supposed to be apolitical. That's why it's a cheap trick. And it's like, no, it's a cheap trick because it plays on emotions and it deceives people into, like you said, thinking it's extra right or whatever. The military in and of themselves is not this holy institution. You're just falling for the exact same facade you're calling out. The only difference is the facade that you're falling for is the military's own image. I mean, you think about the all of the retired generals who speak
Mm.
out like against Trump or against the especially the Dove, individuals like Rand Paul, or even if Bernie Sanders is gonna, pretend to be anti-war for once. Um, when they speak out against them and they're making these, it's like these are broad political statements from people who are in charge at the highest levels of this organization, making, now they can come out and say things more openly. But do you think that these individuals didn't have these views? Do you think as soon as you get into a military office, you're like, all right, I am now going to have no political thoughts. I'm going to have no external influences, helping me decide what move I should or shouldn't take. It's absurd and it's obscene. And even if you believed that of the military generals, ultimately the president would gets to make those calls anyway. So to say that, the the military is apolitical is to completely separate it from the calls of the political people who are making the calls that the generals have to follow.
I think that like this facade of like certain government institutions being apolitical not only extends to the military but also extends to and has been revealed in things like the NIH and the OSHA and all these different areas. It's like, oh, like people used to think, well, oh, OSHA said we should do this, and their only thing is for us to stay safe. I know a lot of blue collar workers that that thought that, and then once the vaccine mandates started rolling down, and it was done through the mechanism of OSHA, safety in the workplace, they're like, oh shoot, like they are kind of political. They do the bidding of whoever they think they're going to get the most funding from. And then you also see this, obviously, like it's like, well, the CDC recommended it, and it's like, well, when the CDC starts flipping back and forth and making contradictory claims, then you start realizing it's like, oh, okay, they have an agenda. People have agendas, and maybe it's not the best thing in the world for those people to be able to, command billions and trillions of tax dollars from their subjects.
Absolutely. And that particular angle kind of bleeds into another post we're going to have here, not this next one but the one after. So we'll take a brief break from this train of thought and pick it up in a second. But this next post reads, Republicans F Joe Biden F you too, Republicans. What? And this one's almost accidentally based but not quite. And the problem I have with it is, one, it makes the assumption that Biden and the, average Republican, and I'll just say broadly speaking, the average voter, the average US citizen, are on an equal level of responsibility of respect. And what I mean by that is we have this insane cultural notion that we have to revere the president. We have to respect the office. We have to laud it. And so the idea that Republicans would be screaming and, saying, screw you to the president is so detesting. I mean, never mind the fact they did that to Trump all the time. Like
Yes.
let's ignore that hypocrisy for the second. How horrible they say that. And so when if Biden comes around and says that right back at them, well, that's what they get because they said it to him. And it's like, no, that's the complete opposite. The level of, if you believe in this institution of government and democracy and representative government that these people put on an altar and pray to at night, the idea is that those people are supposed to be serving the people, right? They're supposed to be working for us, just like the cops, right? And and so if I'm saying, "Hey, screw you" to Biden, that's one thing. He's the elected official. He's the one who's put himself up there. He's the one who's has power and control. Him to say "screw you" too back to us is actually a way bigger deal because he is the mechanism power, and he's not supposed to be serving just the people who voted for him, according to this fantasyland system that they love to act is perfect. He's supposed to be serving every single person. So yeah, people can be screaming profanities at the president all day long, and that person's response is not to say "f you too." On a human level, maybe. I mean, that's still not not the best way to think about it from like a maybe ethical perspective of forgiveness and whatnot. But there's at least a quid pro quo of I say to Brett, "Hey, screw you, man," and he says, "Well, screw you too." Whatever, we're on equal footing. When I'm
Yeah.
saying screw you to Biden and then he has the military pointed at me and says, oh yeah, we're going to arrest you because you one time dissented against one of my rulings. So F you too. That's a little bit different of a situation.
Yeah, there's a bit of a disproportionate power dynamic that
Yes.
is going on when Biden, the ruler of the free world, that commands the most powerful army in the world, is telling you to f off with his goons behind him.
Not
I
politically, of course.
yes, not politically,
Yeah, yeah,
apolitically,
yeah.
because they're just a symbol of what is right, and if they're
Yeah,
giving their endorsement, then it must be good.
just following
Um,
orders.
just following orders. In like a free society, right? Like this, the basis of fu and fu back is kind of like really important, right? Like if you go to a restaurant and you're kind of a terrible customer and loud and obnoxious, and they did their best to like feed you well, and you're just being a jerk and you don't pay, basically giving them the finger, essentially, like they're allowed to fire you as a customer and say f you, get out of my restaurant, right? And so I really like the first half of whether it's a republicans doing it to a Democrat president or Democrats doing it to a Republican president. I really like it when the populace says, hey, F you to our tyrants and rulers, because it's basically like, I'm not going to respect you. Like, you're telling me to do something that I don't want to do. I didn't request for you to do, and you have taken money from me to do. And so F you, I'm not going to do it. Like, that's awesome. That's how it should work. Uh, and it should also be the case that the ruler can say, okay, F you too. And if you don't want to be a part of this, then fine, don't be a part of it anymore. Like that would, there are a lot of people that would really like that as well. A peaceful national divorce. The thing is, it's not like that. What it is it's like the restaurant being able to say to the customer, like, F you, you're going to sit down, eat this food, you're going to like it, and you're going to pay even more now now that you've upset me, and you can't leave until I tell you to. Like, there's an obvious power dynamic that is there that is bad. And I think that I think that a lot of the terminology, I don't know if we've really covered the speech yet, but like him calling people that are mega Republicans a clear and present danger, that was like a doctrine adopted by the Supreme Court, is like how you validate actual action, towards any sort of threat that you think, is there or present for the United States. The same type of terminology that was used to bomb people in the Middle East, and the same terminology that George W. Bush used to, classify the axis of evil in the world, which includes, like North Korea and Saddam Hussein and Iraq and Iran and all these folks. This guy that has the Marines standing behind him, has the military budget at his disposal, decided to call 74 million Americans that voted for Trump, a clear and present danger. Uh, yeah, we should be able to be like, what? That's nuts. That's crazy. These are and it's also even further crazy by the fact that he, just before he said that, he was going, I'm not going to be the president of red states or blue states, of all America, and also all the mega extremists are, a clear and present danger. It's just it's double speak was happening right in front of our faces, with the threat of mass genocide and extermination kind of being hinted at.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. That was the last point I was going to hit. Is everyone talked about, oh, he's going to be the unifying president. He's
Yes.
not going to be like Trump, and it's like, no, there is no. The only unification you get in presidents is we agree to bomb countries overseas. So
Maybe soon domestically, it seems like.
yeah, maybe, maybe. Okay. Here's our next post, and this is a video clip of Joe Biden being shared by the House Judiciary GOP from a speech that it says "angry old man," and the clip is him saying like, "We beat pharma, we beat big pharma." Um, and I'm like, it was a very weird clip to highlight and then say angry old man. Like, I think that right there is initial cringe. It's like, you can criticize, and I'm about to, his stance on big pharma, and you've got a lot of stuff there, and instead they're like angry old man. What?
He
I don't.
looks angry in it. I saw the clip, but yeah, I agree
Yeah,
with you. It's a
yeah,
weird one to say.
yeah. Anyway,
It's like you didn't. Yeah, you'll get into it.
yeah. So, and then we have this big brain reply, which reads, angry. He's excited and happy we beat pharma. My daughter's 90-day supply of insulin went from 250 out of pocket to 3,400 in 2018 because of Azar and corporate profit. As the biggest takers of lobbyist monies, the GOP seems to be okay with that. And then a picture of, or a gif of Biden in sunglasses and a Corvette or something. And what's frustrating and so dumb about this, of course, is as you hinted, he didn't beat Big Pharma. He gave them the biggest bail. He and Trump together gave them the biggest bailout and the biggest mandatory requirements that people buy their products in the form of the vaccine for COVID. He gave them that most absolute dump of money in the history of the United States. Not he didn't beat Big Pharma. He didn't beat them at all. And then the other, example is this person talking about the problems with Big Pharma. And I agree that Big Pharma is an issue, but the only reason they have any power and they have any issues because of the rights that the government gives them and the FDA to approve or not approve generics and alternatives. So when this person's complaining about how the cost went up in 2018 because of these terrible things, she's not wrong, but she's wrong to think that the Democrats are going to help her or are going to make it a long term sustainable thing. And to think that Biden is the champion for that is just very, very silly.
Yeah, I mean, the thought that Big Pharma took a big ol' L in the
Yeah.
past 3 years is just absurd. I mean, regardless of whether you fall on one side or the other of the vaccines, it's like these guys were able to roll out a shot that basically everyone at one point was hypothetically going to be forced to take. If you want to work, at least you were going to be forced to take it, and when you took it, you had no, even if you didn't take it, you were going to pay for someone else to take it. And if it had any sort of bad side effects or anything like that, which is increasingly becoming apparent, they were not liable for it. It was like, oh, like we can just print $30 billion by shoving our product and forcing people to take it. It's like that doesn't sound like a really big L to me. Um, the other side of it too that you kind of alluded to is like the only reason that pharmaceutical drugs are so expensive is because of the various different types of patent laws that exist in the United States. Like you and I don't necessarily believe that that ideas or things like that can be owned, right? And that's well, it's kind of funny is some of the most key secrets to like Apple's technology are actually not patented because the second Apple patents them, they actually have to make the designs visible to everyone. And if they did that, then countries and people that operate in countries that are not under U.S. law would get access to those secrets because they could just look them up, and then they're just going to go and duplicate and do whatever they're going to do with that. And so, patent laws they don't work because eventually someone in another country is just going to get them and use them. But here in the United States with pharmaceutical drugs, it's like we're outlawed from even making, like you're talking about, generics. We have to wait for that patent to expire, and so the drug company is going to pump up the pricing because they can. And people that are a little, maybe even a little bit more conservative, will argue things like, well, the only reason a drug company will invest so much in R&D is because they have the prospect of this really huge return. It's like, well, no, like that drug company could still make that return. They would just need to keep their, that technology secret in some way. Or they would want to keep their price so low that they, take as much of the market as possible so that it's all theirs. I mean, we've linked to it before, but there's a really great video on monopoly and how they can't actually exist without government intervention, and a government propping up certain industries in certain ways. So yeah, so I would just ask this person, this big brained person, like, why do you think that your pharmaceuticals were $3,400, instead of 250? And if you arrive at the conclusion, as we have, why they were so expensive, what changed about that in 2021 and 2022 under Biden? Like nothing, right? Like these companies still have the same sort of monopoly propped up by the government because they can force a drug on people that is paid for involuntarily by millions and millions of taxpayers, and they're not liable for it. They have no repercussions for it. And so it's the same exact thing. You just might not see the cost. Like it's not like you go with a debit card and you see the however much the shot costs coming out of your bank account, but it's coming out of your taxes and it's not being used in other ways that you would probably prefer it be used on you.
Yeah, in that same way, it's like when people are talking about the student loan forgiveness, where it's like, well, they're not raising taxes, and it's like, well, okay, but the taxes they've already taken on you to use for that is now not going towards that, and they have to take tax money from other places, and etc. So it's that same sort of prospect where it's like, look, we live in a reality where we're gonna have our money taken from us unethically. So if the government has that money, I at least want it to be used in a way that's going to make my life better until we can disassemble the jaws of the state. But yeah, I mean, I don't have anything more to add to that because I think you hit it absolutely nail on the head there. Um, okay, so our next post here uh, has socialist reading list: Marx, Engels, Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, Che, Mao, Fanon, Fred Hampton, Michael Parenti, Slavoj Zizek, Bertold Brecht, Gerald Horn, Chris Hedges, Joe Sacco, Malcolm X, Gramsci, Albert Einstein. Anarchist reading list: Tolstoy, Emma Goldman, Kropotkin, Bakunin, Voltaire, De Cleyre, Howard Zinn, Lucy Parsons, Noam Chomsky, Max Stirner, Alan Moore. Libertarian Party reading list: Facebook, 4chan, Rick and Morty, the CIA, uh, psyops, Xbox, YouTube, Amazon. And this is just so cringe to me because it's like, look, if you're gonna, I mean, there's a lot of cringe here, but
They missed a lot on the anarchist one.
well, they missed a lot because they're specifically taking from the sort of traditional left anarchist,
Yeah.
um, defining there, and they're ignoring sort of modern anarcho-capitalist anarchists, a lot of whom would probably fall under the Libertarian Party reading list. So, of course, there's no Hayek, there's no Mises, there's no Rothbard, there's no Malice, there's no Woods, there's no Ron Paul, there's no
There's
oh
no
gosh,
Rand. I would think
there's no
Rand would
Ayn
make that
Rand.
list. Yeah.
Yeah, no Hans Hermann Hoppe. There's none, and obviously there's so much literature to read. And the thing that's frustrating is it's like, look, if you're gonna list out everyone in these different reading lists, like be honest about it. Like this meme is just stupid because it's implying that there isn't any intellectual history for libertarianism, which is just wrong. And then the other thing, of course, is it's like on this socialist reading list, you're proud of like putting Che and Mao in there. Like, good grief! Like Mao
Yeah.
was responsible for the deaths of more than Hitler. Like, good grief! Why would you put him on there if you're trying to make an impressive list?
I think too, the socialist side of it, I do not think most those folks that are arguing on Facebook or Instagram or the people that we've critiqued on here have read a
Yeah,
lot of those books. They might read like they have some you should put Reddit on there, right? Like they got some
yeah.
Reddit argument or image meme thing about, like, oh, well, what if people only had to work for what they need and no one needs to make profit? Once you hit $1 billion, you've won the game. Like all the different cringe posts that we've gone through, I feel like a lot, and this goes on both sides, but like socialists very much are very they grab those like, ooh, quick to understand, and it looks really good right at first look. Which is that's what they're trying to say libertarians do in their own posts. Like, oh, well, they just read 4chan posts, and it's like, okay, like the CIA's psyop is to make a huge portion of the population incredibly skeptical and wanting to point out and reveal all the various ways that they've tried to harm and betray the American people, over the past century. Yeah, that's really a really great psyop. I mean, I guess it's in step with how competent they are. Um, it's really funny to like also list like the other side of it is like people hate on like, well, you just did that on YouTube, or you read this or read that. It's like, yeah, YouTube is like, on YouTube, you can go through more knowledge in like a day than a person in the 1900s could probably get in their entire lifetime. So I don't get why that's like a criticism. Like that's pretty amazing. You can get the equivalent of knowledge of a college degree on YouTube on your phone. So there's a lot of knowledge to be had there. And then the other aspect too is like they left up some of our favorite folks in the anarchist reading list. You and I both have read the Anarchist Handbook, which is great. It has all of these authors and a little bit more, people like Rothbard and Mises and Rand, all people that kind of contribute to this philosophy and built off of or changed or diverged from each other. So these are all good people to read. I even the socialist list. It's like you should read those books because you should be familiar with their arguments, the author's arguments, and you should read the anarchist list, and you should also go through different YouTube rabbit holes and see what people are saying and critically think about the different arguments that are being made, because that's how you become sharper and think and have better thoughts and are able to better defend your position. You can't actually debate someone if you don't understand and are able to actually articulate their position back to them. And so it's just unfortunate. Like it's always kind of irked me when people will criticize, like, well, you're just like a YouTube scholar or whatever. It's like, someone that on YouTube could have a way better knowledge base from YouTube than someone that went to 4 years of Harvard, just because of the breadth of knowledge out there and how quickly and easily you can assimilate it into your brain.
Yeah, that's the last aspect on this that I wanted to touch on, which is this just seems like it's someone who's very obsessed with the right credentials and the right,
Sure.
um, you've got the right label to make sure that your education is correct. And look, I agree that you should be reading scholarly info on this kind of information if you can. Like that absolutely will give you the best chance of having a well structured philosophy. But that's also not necessary, right? Like if all you ever did was listen to various sources on YouTube of people discussing these ideas, but none of them were credentialed, that would could still be okay. You could still be a super intelligent, super smart person with well-rounded views because you listen to people who have digested these books and reiterated them and explained them well. Um, maybe it's not a guarantee, but like the idea that it's like, oh well, this is just a YouTuber, so that doesn't count. You don't have any sort of academic credentialing there. It's like, look, if the arguments are sound, the arguments are
Yep.
sound. Doesn't matter if you have a PhD by your name or not. Okay, our last post is an article from The Hill, which the article title is "How Long COVID is Impacting the Nationwide Labor Shortage," and this post has several choice quotes from it that I pulled that I wanted to discuss. So the first one reads, economists and policymakers have struggled to figure out why a much lower percentage of working age adults are in the labor force than before the pandemic. Roughly 16 million working age Americans said they had long COVID in a June survey conducted by the Census Bureau, but it's unclear how many of them are still too sick to work. Quote, I don't think anyone who's seriously looking at this thinks that long COVID is not a big problem, Fox said in a Thursday interview. And last quote I have is, experts say it's tough to know for sure how many Americans suffer from long COVID, a general term for symptoms of COVID-19 that last weeks or even months after an infection. Oh boy, this is just a great example of the aga- like COVID exists. COVID was viral, but the absolute detriment of COVID being blamed for the problems of the COVID shutdowns and the response to COVID creating these long problems. It's like, okay, so you have an entire generation of people who are just entering the labor force, and right as they do, they're the world shuts down. They're told, don't work, stay at home, and earn money for doing nothing, and then things reopen, reassimilate, and they're told, okay, now you're supposed to go back. And there's just so many aspects of this that are playing into it, and I just don't think that long COVID is playing into the majority of the reasons why people don't want to come back into work. Now, one thing they say, oh, all the jobs are made up and are brought back, but the other thing you have to look at is what kinds of jobs are being brought back, what kinds of jobs were destroyed, and what kind of businesses got shut down. A lot of people like supporting their local businesses. Local businesses were devastated. Restaurant industry in like Seattle was like one of the fourth worst recovering in the nation because of our how long Seattle locked down things. Just absolutely devastating results to businesses. So for one thing, you've killed a lot of entrepreneurial spirit of people who want to create businesses and form their own, because the government just showed, hey, it doesn't matter if you are independent, if you're successful, if you can make it on your own, we can crush you at any single second and you have no choice in the matter, and people can't make their own decision there. Second, so you encourage these payments for people at home, and then you also prevent evictions from happening, and then you tell people you're also going to forgive their student debt. It's like all these people are like, why would I work when all these handouts are going to be happening and there's not going to be nearly as many consequences to pay? The eviction moratoriums are getting extended in places, and student loan interest is being deferred more and more. There's so many people who are thinking, I would rather do my own thing, or there's no urgency to return to work, or they're just burned out from having to work in unreasonable environments with COVID, either through masking or through social distancing or whatever it is, and they're just burned out from it because they have these stupid imposed mandates.
Yeah. people, and this is kind of cornerstone to our philosophy, is that people respond to incentives. And you know, a lot of the folks that were saying like, "Hey, these we should be really careful about these lockdowns, and we should be careful about printing trillions of dollars and giving out these $1,200 checks and putting eviction moratoriums on and all this stuff." We got laughed at as unkind, as people that are not compassionate for our fellow human being. And it's like, well, let's look at it now in the perspective of the incentives that were given to people, because it's obvious that people are like, well, I'm now incentivized to not work, right? And like, work is a really important, if you, as Elon Musk says, if you don't make stuff, there is no stuff. And so now people are kind of like, well, why is, gas so expensive, and why is food going up? It's like, it's a combination of the fact that we've printed so much money, and the fact that our supply was so low for so long. You had a lot of money chasing less and less goods, and all these different things going on. And it's like, well, that's why it is. And so it's so cringe to me how the Hill is doing the mental gymnastics meme to figure out like, well, how can we make this related to COVID and also make Biden look really, really good, but also explain why, when I go to a Jimmy John's on a Friday afternoon, they're closed early because they don't have any people to work. And it's like, the most simple answer is that you incentivize people to not work. You made it possible for them to take on a bunch of debt and use resources before they earn them. And then you made it so that even when they do fall and totally bite the dust, that their consequences are still further delayed. They can't be evicted for however long, whatever state decided the eviction moratorium was going to be. And so what did you expect with all those different incentives? It's very logical, the situation we find ourselves in today. I don't blame people for not wanting to work. It's like, if you never experienced a consequence for it, it's like, well, I can just keep getting away with it. The unfortunate reality, though, is that the longer you put off consequences, the greater they grow, and the more you're going to feel it, and the more people that probably didn't even participate in enjoying the lack of consequences, they're also going to feel it, as a lot of people are feeling it today.
Yeah, and the other aspect is, if we grant them a lot of these the premise that it's, long COVID, or hesitance to return because of COVID, whose fault is that? Is
Yeah.
COVID really so bad that and I think we can
Well,
pretty
they're probably
demonstrably.
vaxxed, right?
Yeah,
So
right, right. What, all these people who are really worried are the ones who are like triple boosted and still wearing a mask in public, and all these kinds of crazy things, but they're still so petrified to go to work. Is that the fault of COVID, or is it the fault of the people who have instilled them with brain rot to think that that's still a response that you should be having? The fear that exists is a response of the COVID lockdowns, not a response of COVID-19. And so to blame it on long COVID is, again, even if it is, let's say that someone has symptoms of long COVID, if they're still not going into work because of those symptoms, unless it is actually debilitating, which I cannot, like, for most people, that is not the issue. Uh, I don't know, that seems like it's not a problem with long COVID. It's a problem of your perception of long COVID and your perception of the disease and all these kinds of things, which has been flip flopped so much between, if you're vaxxed, you're safe. If you're vaxxed, you can't spread it. All these kinds of things. So you've rattled an entire generation into not knowing what to believe, and now they're just terrified, and so they don't want to return to work because of these symptoms, or maybe fear of other people having these symptoms. That's not the fault of the symptoms that actually aren't as harmful, in the vast majority of cases. You could go to work fine with these things, but again, that's not the fault of COVID. That's or long COVID. That's the fault of the lockdowns and the response to COVID and long COVID. So it's just another example of them deflecting blame.
yeah, I love the the first line. uh, Economists and policymakers have struggled to figure out why a much lower percentage of working age adults are in the labor force. It's like it's very reminiscent of when all the inflation stuff was going on. It's like all the experts are remiss that we don't know
Yeah.
what's going on. Like, no one could have predicted this. And you got Ron Paul back in 2012 being like, well, I was 10 years, I predicted this 10 years ago, that this was going to happen. And so, like, let it also just be known, there were people in 2020 saying this would happen. We said this is going to happen. There's going to be a labor shortage. There's going to be supply shortages. There's going to be inflation. You all call this incompassionate, awful, evil people that don't care about our fellow man. And here we are today, and your vaunted experts and policymakers that are supposed to know and make the decisions for you. Either they were too stupid to see that and they should be kicked out, or they knew it and they did it anyways because they had personal benefit, which means they should also be taken out of the running and not be in office anymore and not in a place to make any of these decisions. So just keep that in mind, over the next few months, years, as everyone tries to flip flop back to be like, oh no, we had no idea. Fauci, I never recommended that we lock down. All these guys are going to do that because the data is going to show that they were wrong and that they either were too stupid to know it at the time and therefore should not make any decisions in the future, or they had some sort of other agenda and they were malicious in their actions. They're going to try and rewrite history, and don't let them do it.
Absolutely right. Well, unless you have any other thoughts, I think we're good and we'll end it. Perfect. Well, thanks guys for listening, and we hope you comment, like, subscribe, and tune in for our next one. We'll see you then.